The day Duke Rowan Calder sold his soul to save his name, London held its breath. Snow fell like judgment on the cathedral steps as whispers cut through the frozen air, the proudest man in England, brought to his knees by a merchant's coin. Inside, Rowan stood rigid at the altar, jaw clenched, refusing to turn and face the woman purchased to rescue him from ruin. He had loved once. He had been destroyed for it. Now he would marry a stranger and feel nothing. But when the cathedral doors opened and gasps rippled through the crowd, Rowan realized his carefully constructed walls were about to meet their match. If you're ready to witness pride shatter and love rise from the ashes of a marriage built on desperation, stay until the end. Drop a like and tell us what city you're watching from. The morning of his wedding, Rowan Calder woke in darkness and did not pray. He had stopped praying years ago when his father died and left behind not a legacy, but a graveyard of debts buried under polished mahogany and crystal chandeliers. The Calder name, once spoken with reverence across England's finest drawing rooms, had become a whisper wrapped in pity. Rowan had spent 3 years clawing through ledgers, selling paintings, dismissing servants, watching his ancestral estate bleed out 1 acre at a time. Nothing had been enough. Then Vincent Valles had arrived. The merchant prince had walked into Rowan's study without knocking, trailing the scent of tobacco and foreign spices, and laid a single sheet of paper on the desk. A contract. Marriage to his daughter in exchange for enough gold to drown every debt twice over, rebuild the estates, and restore the Calder name to its former glory. "Your pride or your house, Duke Calder," Velez had said, his accent thick with the rolling vowels of the Mediterranean. "Choose." Rowan had stared at that paper for 3 days. Then he signed it with ink that felt like blood. Now, standing before the mirror in his family's ancient cathedral dressing chamber, Rowan adjusted his cravat with fingers that refused to tremble. Outside, carriages rattled over cobblestones as London's elite gathered to witness the spectacle. He could already hear their voices, sharp with schadenfreude. The great Duke Calder, marrying a merchant's daughter. How the mighty have fallen. "Your Grace!" His valet, Grimsby, one of the few servants he'd managed to keep, appeared in the doorway. The old man's face was carefully neutral. "It's time." Rowan nodded once. He had made a single demand when he signed that contract. He would not see his bride's face until the ceremony began. He would not know her, would not meet her, would not endure the indignity of courtship with a woman his father would have barred from even the servant's entrance. This marriage was a transaction, nothing more. He walked through stone corridors where his ancestors' portraits watched with dead eyes, past the chapel where his mother had been laid to rest, through doors that groaned with the weight of 3 centuries. And finally, he stood at the altar, back rigid, staring straight ahead at the stained glass window that cast fractured light across the sanctuary. The pews filled behind him. He heard silk rustling, fans snapping open, voices barely lowered. £50,000, I heard. More than that. The Valles fortune could buy half of Parliament. But a merchant's daughter in Calder Cathedral, his father must be turning in his grave. Rowan's jaw tightened. Let them whisper. In 6 months the debts would be paid. In a year the estates would flourish again. And this woman, whoever she was, would live in the East Wing while he remained in the West. They would meet for formal dinners and public appearances. She would bear the Calder name and spend her father's money. He would endure her presence and feel nothing. He had learned that skill 3 years ago, when the only woman he'd ever loved had been driven away by his father's cruelty. Rowan had watched Eleanor's carriage disappear down the lane, her tear-stained face at the window, and something inside him had turned to ice. His father had called it necessary. Unsuitable match. No fortune, no connections. The old Duke had been right, of course. 6 months later, his father was dead, and the Calder fortune revealed as a beautiful lie. Eleanor had written once. Rowan had burned the letter without reading it. Now the organ swelled, deep and sonorous, shaking dust from the ancient rafters. The congregation rose as one, fabric rustling like a murder of crows taking flight. Rowan kept his gaze locked forward, hands clasped behind his back in a military parade rest he'd learned as a boy. The cathedral doors opened. Silence fell so complete that Rowan heard snow sliding from the roof outside. Then the whispers started, but different now. Shocked, uncertain. Is that... Look at her face. My God, what happened to her? Rowan's fingers twitched. Every instinct screamed at him to turn, to look, to see what had stolen the breath from 300 aristocrats. But he had made himself a promise. He would not acknowledge her until the vows demanded it. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him curious, concerned, or anything but coldly composed. Footsteps echoed on stone. Slow, measured, not the hesitant shuffle of a nervous bride, but the steady cadence of someone who had walked through far worse than a hostile crowd. She stopped beside him. Rowan could see her in his peripheral vision, ivory fabric, dark hair, something about her posture that suggested a soldier more than a bride. The scent of orange blossoms and leather, an odd combination. The bishop cleared his throat, ancient and wheezing. Dearly beloved. The ceremony blurred. Rowan responded when required, his voice flat and formal. Beside him, the woman's voice was surprisingly low, steady, unshaken by the stares boring into her back. When the bishop finally intoned the words that gave Rowan permission to turn and face his bride, he moved with deliberate slowness and stopped breathing. Luciana Valles was not beautiful in the way London expected. Her face was all sharp angles and bronze skin, her dark eyes fierce beneath heavy brows. Black hair had been pulled back in a severe style that made no attempt at softness. But it was the scar that arrested every gaze, a thick, raised line that cut diagonally from her left temple across her cheekbone, ending at the corner of her mouth. Old, permanent, the kind of wound that told stories no ballroom ever wanted to hear. She looked directly at Rowan with an expression that was neither shy nor pleading, challenging, almost, as if daring him to flinch. He didn't. "You may kiss your bride," the bishop said. Rowan leaned forward with mechanical precision. Their lips touched for exactly 3 seconds, cold, impersonal, a signature on a contract. When he pulled back, he thought he saw the faintest flicker of something in her eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or contempt. "Ladies and gentlemen," the bishop announced, "I present to you the Duke and Duchess of Calder." The applause was polite and poisonous. The wedding breakfast was held in Calder House's Great Hall, a cavernous room where family banners hung from 40-foot ceilings and portraits of stern-faced ancestors glowered from every wall. Long tables groaned under silver and crystal that Rowan had nearly sold a dozen times. The guest list read like a directory of England's most vicious gossips, all of them circling like sharks who'd scented blood in the water. Rowan sat at the head table with Luciana to his right. She had said exactly 3 words to him since they'd left the cathedral. "Thank you," when he'd handed her into the carriage. Now she sat ramrod straight, cutting her food with surgical precision, apparently unconcerned by the fact that half the room was openly staring at her scar. Duchess Calder. Lady Pemberton descended on them like a particularly ornate bird of prey, ostrich feathers bobbing in her hair. "What a unique gown. Foreign design, I presume?" It was an insult wrapped in silk. Luciana's gown was indeed simpler than the elaborate confections the other women wore. Clean lines, minimal lace, no bustles or bows, or any of the frou-frou currently in fashion. "Italian silk," Luciana replied, her accent placing unexpected emphasis on certain syllables. "I find English fashion tends to prioritize decoration over function. Beautiful to look at, impossible to move in. Rather like English aristocracy, wouldn't you say?" Lady Pemberton's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Rowan felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. He quashed it immediately. "And your family, Duchess," Lord Harrington drawled from across the table, already 3 glasses deep into Rowan's best port. "We know so little about the Valles enterprise. Trading, is it? In what, precisely?" The question dripped with disdain. Trading was barely a step above shopkeeping in their world. "Spices, fabrics, precious metals, weapons," Luciana said calmly, not bothering to lower her voice. "We own 14 ships and maintain trade routes across 3 continents. Last year alone, our profits exceeded the combined annual income of everyone at this table." She smiled, sharp as a knife. "So, yes, Lord Harrington, trading." A shocked silence fell. Then someone laughed, a short, involuntary bark of surprise. Rowan glanced down the table and saw young Lord Wickham, barely 20, trying to hide his grin behind his napkin. Lord Harrington's face turned an impressive shade of crimson. Well, I see breeding and fortune are not always found in the same package. True enough, Luciana agreed pleasantly, though I've found that breeding often produces nothing but inbreeding, weak bloodlines and weaker minds. This time several people gasped audibly. Rowan should have intervened, should have smoothed it over, made some diplomatic comment that allowed everyone to save face. Instead, he found himself studying his new wife with reluctant curiosity. She showed absolutely no fear. These people, whose approval English nobility spent lifetimes courting, meant nothing to her. Less than nothing. My dear, Vincent Velez appeared behind Luciana's chair, resplendent in burgundy velvet that would have looked ridiculous on anyone else but somehow suited his leonine presence. Perhaps a tour of the grounds. The Duchess has heard so much about the famous Calder Gardens. It was a rescue disguised as a suggestion. Luciana rose smoothly, laying her napkin beside her plate. Of course, Papa. As she turned to leave, her gaze swept across Rowan, cool, assessing, revealing nothing. Then she was gone, leaving a wake of scandalized whispers. Well, the Duchess of Marlborough announced to no one in particular, I suppose we know why he demanded not to see her before the wedding. Can you imagine his face when he turned around? Apparently she got that scar in some sort of incident in Gibraltar, someone else murmured. A knife fight with sailors, I heard. No, it was bandits on the Silk Road. I heard she killed a man with her bare hands. Rowan's hands curled into fists beneath the table. He wanted to leave, to escape to his study and lose himself in ledgers where numbers made sense and emotions could be calculated away. But he was the Duke of Calder, and he would sit through this performance with the same iron control he'd maintained since his father's death. The afternoon crawled forward. Guests departed with elaborate thank yous and eyes bright with fresh gossip. By the time the last carriage rattled away, twilight was settling over the grounds like ash. Rowan found Grimsby in the hall. Where's the Duchess? The East Wing, Your Grace. Her apartments, as you requested. As I requested. The words sat heavy in his chest. He had specified separate wings in the marriage contract. Luciana would have her space, he would have his. They would maintain separate lives under one roof. Clean, simple, emotionless. Very well. I'll be in my study. I'm not to be disturbed. He spent that evening exactly as he'd spent the previous 1,000. Reviewing accounts, projecting revenues, planning improvements. The Velez fortune would begin transferring tomorrow. Within a month, he could start hiring back staff. Within 3 months, the tenant farms could be properly managed again. Within a year, a knock at the door interrupted his calculations. I said I wasn't to be disturbed, Rowan called, not looking up. The door opened anyway. Luciana stood in the threshold, still wearing her wedding gown, but with her hair loose now, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She'd removed her shoes. There was something wild about her like this, untamed despite the expensive silk. We should discuss the arrangements, she said without preamble. Rowan set down his pen. The arrangements are clear. You have the East Wing, I have the West. We will take meals together when propriety demands it. You are free to manage the household as you see fit, within the budget Grimsby will provide. And children? The word hung in the air like smoke. An heir will be necessary, Rowan said finally. Eventually. How clinical. She stepped into the room, moving with a grace that seemed at odds with the hardness in her eyes. Tell me, Duke Calder, do you intend to close your eyes and think of England? Or will you at least do me the courtesy of pretending I'm someone you chose? Heat crept up Rowan's neck. This marriage is a business arrangement, Duchess. I thought we both understood that. Oh, I understand it perfectly. She stopped in front of his desk, leaning forward to brace her hands on the mahogany surface. The scar pulled taut across her cheek. You needed money. My father needed respectability for his merchant blood. I needed... She paused, something flickering behind her eyes. Let's say I had my reasons. So yes, business. But even business partners communicate. We're communicating now. Are we? She tilted her head. You haven't asked me a single question. About where I'm from, what I like, what I fear. You haven't even asked about this. She traced the scar with one finger. You've made assumptions. That I'm some desperate, grateful creature who should be honored to wear your name. That I'll be content to hide in the East Wing while you brood in the West. I'm not brooding. You've perfected it into an art form. She straightened. Here's what I propose. We try honesty. You tell me why a duke who could have married any eligible woman in England chose a contract with a merchant's daughter instead. I'll tell you why I agreed to marry a man who couldn't even look at me before signing his name. Then we decide if we're going to be enemies living in the same house, or if we might manage something resembling civility. Rowan stared at her. Every instinct told him to dismiss her, to maintain the walls he'd so carefully constructed. But there was something in her directness that disarmed him. She wasn't playing the games he'd expected, wasn't weeping or pleading or trying to seduce him into affection. She was treating him like an equal, possibly the only person who had, since his father died. I loved someone once, he heard himself say. My father drove her away because she had no fortune, no connections. He said it was for the good of the family. 6 months later, he was dead, and I discovered the family fortune was a fiction built on borrowed money and delusion. He met Luciana's eyes. I learned that love is a luxury people like us cannot afford. So when the debts came due, I made the only logical choice. Your father's offer saved everything, the estates, the name, the legacy. In exchange, I married a stranger. That's the truth. Luciana was quiet for a long moment. My mother died when I was 12, she said finally. Fever. After that, Papa threw himself into building his empire. He took me everywhere. Cairo, Istanbul, Gibraltar. I learned to fight because the docks aren't safe for merchants' daughters. I learned languages because trade requires communication. I learned to read men because in my father's world, a moment of trust could mean a knife in the dark. She touched her scar again. This happened in Naples, a business rival. I survived. He didn't. Rowan's eyebrows rose fractionally. I agreed to this marriage because my father is getting old, she continued. He wants to see his grandchildren born with titles. He wants the Velez name elevated beyond merchant prince. And her voice softened, almost imperceptibly. I wanted to stop running, to have a home that wasn't a ship's cabin or a rented villa, to build something that couldn't be packed into trunks and moved when the political winds shifted. Your house provided that. So yes, business. They studied each other across the desk, two people bound by contracts and necessity, each carrying wounds that hadn't quite healed. Civility, then, Rowan said finally. We maintain separate lives, but we're honest when we speak. No pretense of affection we don't feel. Agreed. Luciana extended her hand. Rowan shook it. Her grip was firm, calloused in unexpected places. Not the soft hand of a lady bred for drawing rooms. One more thing, she added as she turned to leave. The gardens are a disaster. The roses are dying, the hedges are overgrown, and there's some kind of blight on the east lawn. I'm going to fix them. You garden? I do many things your society would consider inappropriate for a duchess. She paused at the door. Get used to being surprised, husband. Then she was gone, leaving Rowan alone with his ledgers and the uncomfortable realization that his carefully ordered world had just acquired a very unpredictable variable. What? The next week settled into an uneasy rhythm. True to her word, Luciana took control of the gardens with the same fierce efficiency she apparently applied to everything. Rowan would look out his study window and see her there, dressed in practical wool with her sleeves rolled up, directing a crew of bewildered groundskeepers as she personally dug up dead roots and tested soil composition. She worked alongside the servants, something no duchess in living memory had done, and somehow commanded their absolute loyalty within days. The house itself began to change. Luciana hired back staff, but not the ones Rowan expected. She chose based on competence rather than pedigree, bringing in a French chef who'd worked in Marseille taverns, a housekeeper who'd run a profitable boarding house in Liverpool, a stable master who'd trained cavalry horses during the Crimean War. Where did you find these people? Rowan asked one evening at dinner, one of their thrice-weekly formal meals. I asked the servants you already employed who they'd recommend, Luciana replied, cutting into roasted pheasant. Apparently, your father had a habit of hiring based on family connections rather than actual skill. Mrs. Bramwell suggested we might benefit from a different approach. Mrs. Bramwell was the elderly housekeeper who'd served the Calders for 40 years. The idea that she'd conspired with Luciana to overhaul the household staff was unexpected. And the expense? Rowan asked carefully. Well, within the household budget you provided. Actually under by about 15%, since I negotiated better rates with the suppliers. She raised an eyebrow. Did you know the previous housekeeper was paying twice the market rate for candles because her nephew owned the chandlery? Rowan had not known that. I've also identified 3 tenant farmers who've been shorting their rents by claiming crop failures while selling surplus in neighboring markets. Luciana continued. I've documented everything. You'll find the report in your study. She was right, of course. Rowan found the report that evening, meticulously detailed with witness statements and financial calculations that would have impressed a barrister. 3 of his tenant farmers had been cheating him for years, and he'd been too buried in debt to notice. He should have been grateful. Instead, he felt obscurely threatened, as if she were taking over territory he'd thought was his alone to command. Their next formal dinner, he arrived with his own report. The South Fields have been lying fallow for 2 years. I've arranged for a new crop rotation system and hired an agricultural consultant from Scotland. We should see yields increase by 30% within 2 seasons. Luciana smiled faintly. I've also taken the liberty of contacting my father's trade partners. The cotton from your South Fields could be sold directly to mills in Manchester at a significantly higher rate than you're currently getting from London brokers. It became a subtle war. Each dinner brought new improvements, new efficiencies, each of them trying to prove they were the more capable administrator of Calder estates. The staff began placing bets on who would arrive with the more impressive report, but they never discussed anything personal, never asked about each other's days beyond the business of running the household, never touched except for the requisite hand-holding during public appearances. Rowan told himself he preferred it this way. Then came the incident with Lord Ashford. The man arrived uninvited one afternoon, already drunk, demanding to see Rowan about some imagined slight from the wedding. Grimsby tried to turn him away, but Ashford pushed past, shouting obscenities about merchant whores and bought duchesses. Rowan was halfway down the stairs when he heard Luciana's voice, cold as winter steel. You will leave, now. Or what? Ashford sneered. You'll have your merchant papa buy me off? Everyone knows what you are, girl. A jumped-up tradesman's brat with a scar that proves you belong in back alleys, not— The sound of impact was shockingly loud. Rowan rounded the corner to find Ashford on the floor, blood streaming from his nose, and Luciana standing over him with her fist still clenched. I said leave, she repeated. For a moment, Ashford looked like he might try to rise. Then he saw something in her face, some echo of Naples docks and Mediterranean violence, and scrambled backward instead, practically falling through the doorway in his haste to escape. Silence filled the hall. Luciana uncurled her fist slowly, examining her knuckles. I may have broken his nose. Possibly, Rowan agreed. She finally looked at him. This will cause scandal. Undoubtedly. Your reputation was already damaged by marrying you, Rowan heard himself say. Then, before he could stop it, he felt his mouth curve into something that might have been a smile. Might as well make it memorable. Luciana stared at him. Then, incredibly, she laughed. A real laugh. Full and genuine, nothing like the polite sounds she made at formal dinners. I suppose we should prepare for the gossip, she said. I suppose we should. They stood there in the entrance hall, and for the first time since the wedding, Rowan allowed himself to really look at his wife. The scar that society found so shocking, the fierce intelligence in her dark eyes, the strength in her shoulders from weeks of manual labor in gardens no duchess should have touched. The bruised knuckles from defending his house. Something shifted in his chest, something dangerous that felt like the ice beginning to crack. He turned away before she could see it in his face. I have work to attend to, he said stiffly, and retreated to his study like a man fleeing battle. Behind him, Luciana watched him go with an expression that might have been understanding, or might have been disappointment. She couldn't quite tell which she preferred. The scandal broke within hours. Lord Ashford, it turned out, had gone straight to his club and regaled everyone with a wildly embellished tale of assault by the savage Duchess. By evening, half of London was convinced Luciana had attacked him unprovoked. By the next morning, calling cards stopped arriving at Calder House entirely. Luciana received the news from Mrs. Bramwell with perfect composure. "Let them talk," she said, returning to her work in the gardens. But Rowan watched from his study window as she knelt among the roses and saw the way her shoulders tensed whenever a carriage passed on the road, seeing if anyone would stop, knowing none would. That evening, he broke their unspoken rule and went to find her. She was in the greenhouse transplanting seedlings by lamplight. She didn't look up when he entered. "You don't have to check on me," she said. "I'm not some fragile flower that wilts at the first frost." "I know." Rowan stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets. "That's not why I'm here." She glanced at him then, curious. "I wanted to say—" He paused, the words more difficult than he'd expected. "What you did for this house. Standing up to Ashford. Everything you've done these past weeks. I should have acknowledged it." Luciana set down her trowel carefully. "Are you thanking me, Duke Calder?" "Rowan," he said, "you may as well use my name. We're married, after all." "Are we?" The question was soft but pointed. "We live in the same house, we sign the same documents, but married implies something we've both been careful to avoid." "What's that?" "Caring what happens to each other." The truth of it sat between them like a third presence. Rowan had spent months building walls against exactly this, against feeling anything for the woman who'd been purchased to save his legacy, against the vulnerability that had destroyed him when his father drove Eleanor away, against hope, which was the most dangerous thing of all. But standing in the greenhouse with soil-stained lamplight painting Luciana's face in gold and shadow, her scar a silver line across her cheek like a badge of honor, Rowan felt those walls trembling. "I should go," he said abruptly. "Yes," Luciana agreed, but her eyes said something different. "You should." He left before he could do something foolish, like stay, like ask her about the seedlings she was planting with such care, like admit that he'd started looking forward to their formal dinners, started listening for her voice in the halls, started feeling something other than the cold numbness he'd wrapped around himself like armor. That night, Rowan lay awake in his chambers and admitted a truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. His marriage of convenience was becoming inconveniently complicated, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a liveried footman who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else than standing on the doorstep of Calder House. Grimsby brought it to Rowan's study on a silver tray, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant trouble. "From the Duchess of Marlborough, Your Grace." Rowan broke the seal and scanned the contents. His jaw tightened with each line. It was an invitation to the Marlborough Winter Ball, the most prestigious social event of the season, where alliances were forged and reputations were made or destroyed, the kind of event that could rehabilitate a scandal or bury it permanently, the kind of event where Luciana would be put on trial by every gossip in London. "The Duchess received one as well," Grimsby added quietly. "She's in the orangery." Rowan found her there, surrounded by potted citrus trees and the sharp, sweet scent of orange blossoms. She was examining a lemon tree with the focused intensity she brought to everything, her fingers gentle on the leaves as she checked for signs of disease. "We've been invited to the Marlborough Ball," he said without preamble. Luciana didn't look up. "I assumed we would be eventually. The Duchess enjoys spectacle too much to resist." "You understand what this means? That I'll be paraded like a curiosity? That every woman there will count the ways I'm inferior, and every man will wonder if the rumors about Naples are true?" Now she did look at him, her dark eyes unreadable. "I've survived worse than a London ballroom, Rowan." It was the first time she'd used his given name. Something flickered in his chest. "We don't have to go," he said. "I could send our regrets and confirm that I'm exactly what they think I am, a coward hiding behind purchased titles." She set down her pruning shears with deliberate care. "No, we'll go. We'll smile. We'll dance. And we'll show them that the Duke and Duchess of Calder bow to no one. The fierce pride in her voice reminded Rowan uncomfortably of himself, of the iron control he'd maintained through his father's death, through the revelation of debts, through every whispered insult. She had that same steel core. Then we'll need to prepare, he said. The Marlboroughs will be watching for any weakness. Let them watch. Luciana turned back to her lemon tree. I've been watched my entire life. I'm rather good at disappointing expectations. The week before the ball, Calder House transformed into a war room. Luciana drilled herself on English aristocratic genealogy with the same intensity she'd once used to memorize trade routes. She could recite which lord was cousin to which duchess, who'd married whose sister, which families were allied and which were feuding. Mrs. Bramwell tested her nightly, and Luciana answered without hesitation. The Pemberton family? Mrs. Bramwell asked. 3 daughters, all married to minor lords. The eldest controls her husband's vote in Parliament. The youngest gambles. They're allied with the Ashfords through the mother's side, which means they'll be hostile. The Wickhams? New money, elevated 2 generations ago through military service. The current Lord Wickham is young and drowning in debt his father left, potentially sympathetic to our situation. Rowan listened from the doorway, unseen. He'd come to discuss the household accounts, and instead found himself transfixed by his wife's tactical mind. She was treating the ballroom like a battlefield, identifying allies and enemies with cold precision. Your Grace, Mrs. Bramwell said, spotting him. We were just— Continue, Rowan interrupted. I'd like to hear the rest. Luciana's eyes met his. Challenge flickered there, along with something that might have been invitation. The Marlboroughs themselves, Mrs. Bramwell prompted. The Duke is ineffectual and controlled by his wife, Luciana recited. The Duchess is the true power, intelligent, ruthless, and bored. She collects scandals the way other women collect porcelain. She invited us because she wants to see if I'll shatter under pressure or prove entertaining enough to keep around. And which will you be? Rowan asked. Luciana smiled, sharp as a blade. Neither. I'll be useful. Useful how? The Duchess of Marlborough has 2 weaknesses. Her son is courting a French heiress, and she despises the French. She needs that marriage for the fortune, but wants a way to control the girl once she arrives in England. Luciana stood, brushing soil from her hands. My father trades extensively in France. I speak fluent French. I know the major families. If I offer myself as a cultural liaison, someone to help the poor girl navigate English society, the Duchess gains an asset, Rowan finished, and you gain an ally. Exactly. He stared at her. Where did you learn to think like this? My father's business required navigating courts from Cairo to Constantinople, Luciana said. English aristocracy is no different than Ottoman pashas. Everyone wants power, everyone fears losing it, and everyone can be negotiated with if you find the right currency. She tilted her head. You thought I spent my youth in sheltered drawing rooms, learning needlepoint. I didn't think about it at all, Rowan admitted. Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify. Disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. Well, she said lightly, now you know. The merchant's daughter has a merchant's mind. How terribly common of me. She moved to leave, but Rowan caught her wrist. The contact shocked them both, their first deliberate touch since the wedding. I didn't mean it as an insult, he said. I meant it as— He struggled for the word. Admiration, you're— He released her, suddenly aware of the warmth of her skin. You're formidable, Luciana. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unguarded for once. So are you, when you're not hiding behind those walls you've built. I'm not hiding? Aren't you? She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell orange blossoms in her hair. You've been hiding since the day we married. Maybe longer. From me. From everyone. From whatever it was that hurt you badly enough to make you afraid of feeling anything at all. I'm not afraid. Liar. The word hung between them like a gauntlet thrown. You want honesty? Rowan heard his voice turn cold, defensive. Fine. You're right, I hide. Because the last time I let myself care about someone, my father destroyed it and then died, leaving me with nothing but debts and duty. So yes, I built walls. And yes, I married you as a transaction, because transactions can't betray you. They can't die. They can't. He stopped, breathing hard. Luciana's eyes had gone soft. Can't leave you, she finished quietly. Rowan turned away, jaw clenched. This conversation is pointless. Is it? He heard the rustle of her skirts as she moved closer. Or is it the first honest conversation we've had since the wedding? We agreed to civility, not this. Not what? Not truth? Her hand touched his shoulder, light, tentative. I told you in Naples I learned to read men. You wear your armor well, Rowan, but I see the cracks. You're terrified that if you let me in, I'll become another thing you can lose. He wanted to deny it, wanted to rebuild those walls and shut her out, but her hand on his shoulder burned like a brand, and for the first time in 3 years, Rowan felt the ice around his heart beginning to fracture. The ball is in 4 days, he said instead, his voice rough. We should focus on that. Luciana's hand dropped. When she spoke, her tone was carefully neutral again. Of course. Forgive me for overstepping. She left before he could respond, and Rowan stood alone in the orangery, surrounded by the scent of citrus and the weight of words he couldn't quite bring himself to say. The night of the Marlborough Ball arrived with freezing rain that turned London's streets to rivers of mud and ice. Rowan stood in the entrance hall, adjusting his white gloves for the 3rd time, trying to ignore the knot of tension in his stomach. He told himself it was concern about the evening's politics, not anticipation of seeing Luciana in formal dress. He was lying. When she descended the stairs, the breath left his lungs. She wore midnight blue silk that seemed to capture starlight, cut in a style that was neither English nor foreign, but something uniquely hers. Elegant, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Her hair was swept up, revealing the long line of her neck, and she'd made no attempt to hide her scar. Instead, she'd somehow made it part of her armor, a declaration rather than a flaw. She looked like a warrior queen preparing for battle. Will I do? She asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. You'll terrify them, Rowan said honestly. Good. She descended the last steps and took his offered arm. Her fingers trembled slightly against his sleeve, the only sign of nerves she'd permit herself to show. Shall we, husband? The Marlborough townhouse blazed with light, every window glowing like a beacon against the storm. Carriages clogged the street, disgorging aristocrats in furs and jewels, everyone determined to see the spectacle of the scarred Duchess. Rowan felt Luciana's grip tighten as they mounted the steps. Remember, she murmured, we bow to no one. Inside, the ballroom was a riot of silk and crystal, 500 of London's elite, packed into a space designed for 300. Conversation died in ripples as Rowan and Luciana were announced. Every eye turned to assess, to judge, to find weakness. The Duchess of Marlborough materialized from the crowd like a ship under full sail, diamonds dripping from her neck and malice glinting in her eyes. Duke Calder, how delightful, she purred. And the new Duchess, how brave of you to come. Your Grace is too kind, Luciana replied, her accent perfectly controlled. I wouldn't miss an opportunity to see English society at its finest. The Duchess's smile sharpened. Indeed, though I confess we're all dying to hear about your adventures. Is it true you've traveled to the Orient? It was a trap, asking Luciana to speak of her merchant background, her common experiences. Every ear in the vicinity strained to listen. I've been fortunate to see much of the world, Luciana said calmly. Constantinople, Alexandria, ports throughout the Mediterranean. Your son mentioned he'll soon be traveling to Paris for his betrothal. I'd be happy to offer advice. The French can be so particular about protocol. Rowan watched the Duchess's eyes widen fractionally. Luciana had just offered the exact currency she'd predicted. Knowledge, access, usefulness. How thoughtful, the Duchess said slowly. Perhaps we should speak more privately later. I would be honored. The Duchess moved on, and Rowan allowed himself a small smile. First blood to you. The night is young, Luciana murmured. Don't celebrate yet. She was right to be cautious. As the evening progressed, the attacks came from all directions. Lady Pemberton made pointed comments about proper bloodlines. Lord Harrington loudly discussed the vulgarity of trade within Luciana's hearing. A cluster of young women giggled behind their fans, their eyes cruel as they examined every detail of Luciana's appearance. Through it all, Luciana remained composed, parrying insults with grace, turning attacks into demonstrations of knowledge or wit. She spoke of art with those who valued culture, of politics with those who craved power, of fashion with those who cared for nothing else. She adapted to each conversation like water, finding the shape that would serve her best. Rowan watched her work the room and felt something uncomfortably close to pride. Then Lord Ashford appeared, his nose still slightly swollen from their previous encounter. "Duchess Calder," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "I believe you owe me an apology." Luciana turned slowly. "Do I?" "You assaulted me in your own home, broke my nose. Conduct unbecoming of a lady, wouldn't you say?" The crowd pressed closer, scenting blood. Rowan started to intervene, but Luciana's hand on his arm stopped him. Her eyes never left Ashford. "You're quite right," she said clearly. "My conduct was unbecoming." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ashford's face lit with triumph. "I should never have stopped at your nose," Luciana continued. "In Naples, a man who spoke to a woman the way you spoke to me would have lost teeth. You should consider yourself fortunate that English propriety saved you from a more comprehensive education." Dead silence. Then young Lord Wickham laughed, a sharp, delighted bark that broke the tension like shattering glass. Others joined in, tentatively at first, then with genuine amusement. Ashford's face turned purple. "You savage little—" "Careful," Rowan said quietly, stepping forward. "You're addressing my wife. And unlike her, I feel no need to restrain myself to propriety." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Ashford looked between them, the Duke who'd finally found something worth defending, and the Duchess who'd proven she could defend herself, and apparently decided discretion was the wiser choice. "This isn't over," he muttered, and pushed his way through the crowd. Rowan turned to Luciana. She was breathing hard, her composure finally cracking around the edges. "I need air," she said. He guided her through the French doors onto the terrace, where rain misted the stones and the cold bit through evening clothes. Luciana gripped the balustrade, her knuckles white. "That was incredibly stupid," she said. "I just made an enemy who'll spend the rest of his life trying to destroy us." "You made him look like a fool," Rowan corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" She turned to face him, and he saw tears of frustration glittering in her eyes. "This is your world, Rowan. These are the people you'll have to live among for the rest of your life. And I can't—" Her voice broke. "I can't be what they want. The perfect docile duchess who apologizes for existing. I don't know how." "Then don't," Rowan said. She stared at him. "Don't be what they want," he continued, the words coming from somewhere deep and honest. "Be what you are, brilliant and fierce and uncompromising. Be the woman who rebuilt my estates in weeks, who knocked Ashford on his arse, who knows more about trade and politics than half the lords in that ballroom. Be the woman who terrifies them because she refuses to play by their rules. That's easy for you to say. You were born into this world. And I was dying in it," Rowan said, slowly suffocating under the weight of tradition and duty and pretending not to care about anything because caring was too dangerous. He took a step closer. "Then you arrived. And you tore through every assumption I had about what a wife should be, what a duchess should be, what I should want. And yes, it's terrifying, but it's also the first time in 3 years I've felt alive." Luciana's breath caught. "Rowan, I know we agreed this was a transaction," he said. "I know we promised civility and nothing more. But somewhere between the wedding and tonight, that stopped being enough. And I think—" He forced himself to meet her eyes. "I think you feel it too." For a long moment, Luciana said nothing. Rain misted around them, and music drifted from the ballroom like a dream. "If we do this," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "if we let this become real, we can't go back. We can't retreat to our separate wings and pretend we're strangers who happen to share a name." "I know. And I won't be your second choice. I won't be the consolation prize you settle for because the woman you really loved was driven away." The words cut deep, but Rowan didn't flinch. "You're not. Eleanor was—" She was the dream of a different man, in a different life. A man who thought love was enough to overcome everything. He reached out, his fingers brushing the scar on her cheek with infinite gentleness. You're the reality of who I am now. Someone who understands that love isn't gentle or easy, that it's built in gardens and greenhouses, in shared battles and honest words. Someone who makes me want to be more than the ghost I've been. Luciana's eyes closed. When she opened them again, they shimmered with unshed tears and something that looked dangerously like hope. I'm afraid, she admitted. I've survived knife fights and storms and my mother's death. But this terrifies me. Me too, Rowan said. Then he kissed her. Not the cold ceremonial touch from their wedding, but something real and desperate and entirely honest. Luciana made a small sound and kissed him back, her hands fisting in his coat, and Rowan felt the last of his carefully constructed walls crumble to ash. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the world had shifted on its axis. Well, Luciana said shakily, that complicates things. Considerably, Rowan agreed. A commotion from inside the ballroom made them both turn. Raised voices, the sound of breaking glass, and then the French doors burst open. Lord Harrington stood there, flanked by several other lords, all of them clearly drunk and spoiling for confrontation. There you are, Harrington slurred, hiding on the terrace like cowards while you insult your betters inside. We insulted no one, Rowan said coldly. Now step aside. Not until that savage wife of yours apologizes, another lord chimed in. Pemberton, face flushed with wine and malice. First Ashford, now half the ballroom. She needs to learn her place. My place? Luciana's voice could have cut steel. And where exactly is that, Lord Pemberton? Below you? Below men who've accomplished nothing but being born to the right parents? Below those who think titles excuse cruelty? You're a merchant's brat playing dress-up, Harrington snarled. Everyone knows it. Everyone sees that scar and knows exactly what kind of woman you really are. Rowan moved before he could think, his fist connecting with Harrington's jaw with a crack that echoed across the terrace. The lord went down hard, sprawling across wet stone. The other men surged forward, and suddenly Rowan was trading blows with Pemberton while a third lord grabbed for Luciana. She twisted away with fighter's grace and drove her elbow into his solar plexus, dropping him like a stone. Stop this immediately! The Duchess of Marlborough's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. She stood in the doorway, the entire ballroom crowd behind her, every face frozen in shock. What, she said icily, is the meaning of this? They attacked us, Luciana said, breathing hard. Called me a savage, demanded I apologize for defending myself. She provoked us, Harrington gasped from the ground. She's been provoking everyone all evening with her foreign ways and common manners. Enough. The Duchess's eyes swept the scene. Lord Harrington, you're drunk and disorderly. Lord Pemberton, you've assaulted a woman, and you— She turned to the man Luciana had dropped. You're bleeding on my terrace. But I saw everything from the ballroom, the Duchess interrupted. The Duke and Duchess of Calder were having a private conversation when you lot stormed out here like barbarians. Her gaze shifted to Luciana, assessing. Though I must say, Duchess, that was a remarkably effective defensive maneuver. Where did you learn it? Naples, Luciana said. The docks aren't safe for women who can't defend themselves. Clearly. The Duchess of Marlborough's lips twitched. Gentlemen, you will leave my home immediately. The Calders will stay. We have much to discuss. The disgraced lords were escorted out, and the crowd slowly dispersed back to the ballroom, buzzing with fresh gossip. The Duchess gestured for Rowan and Luciana to follow her to a private sitting room. That, she said once the door was closed, was the most entertaining ball I've hosted in a decade. Rowan and Luciana exchanged glances. You're not angry? Rowan asked carefully. Us. Angry? My dear Duke, you just gave me the scandal of the season. By tomorrow, every household in London will be talking about the Calder Duchess, who fought off 3 drunk lords while her husband defended her honor. The Duchess sat, arranging her skirts. You've just become the most interesting couple in England. And the most hated, Luciana said. Possibly, but also the most talked about, which in our world amounts to the same thing as power. The Duchess studied them both. You offered to help with my son's French bride. I accept. But more than that, I find I rather like you both. You're genuine in a world of pretense. That's rare enough to be valuable. She stood, signaling the conversation was over. Go home, she advised. Weather the storm. And for heaven's sake, stop pretending you don't care for each other. It's exhausting to watch. They left the Marlborough townhouse in silence, climbing into their carriage as rain pounded the roof. The ride back to Calder House passed in a blur of street lamps and storm. Only when they were inside, standing in the entrance hall with wet clothes and bruised knuckles, did Luciana finally speak. Did we just make everything better, or infinitely worse? Honestly? Rowan turned to her. I have no idea. Luciana laughed, slightly hysterical. We're going to be the scandal of the season. We already were. True. She looked at him, really looked at him, at his split knuckles from defending her, at the fierce protectiveness still burning in his eyes. You hit Lord Harrington. He insulted you. He's a lord. You could face consequences. I don't care, Rowan said, and realized he meant it. Let them censure me. Let them whisper and gossip and condemn. I'm done pretending any of it matters more than… He stopped. More than what? Luciana asked softly. Rowan reached out and cupped her scarred cheek, his thumb tracing the silver line with tenderness that would have been impossible weeks ago. More than you, he finished, and kissed her again, there in the entrance hall of Calder House, with rain drumming against the windows and the weight of scandal hanging over their heads like a sword. Neither of them cared. For 3 perfect days, they pretended the world outside Calder House didn't exist. Rowan moved his belongings from the west wing to chambers adjoining Luciana's. They took breakfast together in the orangery, surrounded by citrus trees and morning light. They walked the gardens in the afternoon, planning spring plantings while their hands brushed with increasing frequency. At night, they sat by the fire in what had become their shared sitting room, reading aloud or simply existing in comfortable silence. It felt like breathing after years of suffocation. Then the letters started arriving. The first came on the 4th morning, delivered with the regular post. Grimsby brought it on a silver tray, his expression troubled. From the Earl of Pemberton, Your Grace. Rowan broke the seal and read. His jaw tightened with each line. What is it? Luciana asked, setting down her tea. A formal complaint to the House of Lords, claiming I assaulted Pemberton without provocation and demanding I be censured for conduct unbecoming a peer. He crumpled the letter. It's signed by 23 lords. Luciana went very still. 23. Including several I thought were neutral. Rowan's voice was flat, but she could see the tension coiling in his shoulders. Apparently the Marlborough Ball convinced them I've become a liability to aristocratic dignity. Because you defended your wife. Because I chose you over them. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. More letters arrived throughout the day. Lord Harrington's lawyer threatening a lawsuit. Lady Pemberton withdrawing her patronage from several charities Luciana had quietly been supporting. 3 invitations to upcoming events pointedly rescinded. By evening, the full scale of the backlash became clear. They're isolating us, Luciana said, standing at the window of Rowan's study. Outside, a carriage had stopped at the gate, then driven on without delivering whatever message it carried. The 3rd such occurrence that afternoon. Making sure everyone knows that associating with the Calders means social death. Let them try, Rowan said grimly. We don't need their approval. Don't we? She turned to face him. Your position in the House of Lords depends on maintaining respect. Your tenant farmers depend on connections to markets controlled by these same people. None of it matters more than you. It should, Luciana said sharply. This is your birthright, Rowan. Your legacy. I won't be the reason you lose everything you fought to save. You're not… A knock interrupted. Grimsby entered, his face ashen. Your Grace, there's a man at the door. He says he represents the Bank of England. Cold dread settled in Rowan's stomach. The banker was a thin man named Erskine, with wire-rimmed spectacles and the apologetic manner of someone delivering a death sentence. I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, Duke Calder, he said, perched on the edge of a chair in the drawing room. "But certain concerns have been raised regarding the solvency of your estates." "What concerns?" Rowan demanded. "The Valles dowry more than covered all outstanding debts. Every creditor was paid in full." "Indeed they were. However, several of your peers have suggested that the source of those funds may be questionable." Erskine consulted his notes. "There are allegations that Vincent Velez's trading empire engages in smuggling, possibly trafficking in goods prohibited by Crown law. If these allegations prove true, any money derived from such activities would be subject to seizure." "That's absurd," Luciana said. "My father's business is completely legitimate." "I'm sure it is, Duchess. However, the bank must investigate all formal complaints. Until the matter is resolved, I'm afraid all funds from the Valles dowry will be frozen." Erskine stood, genuinely apologetic. "This includes the amounts already used to pay creditors. If the investigation determines the funds were illegally obtained, those debts will be considered unsatisfied. You could be sued for repayment." Rowan felt the floor shift beneath him. "How long will this investigation take?" "These matters can be quite complex. 6 months, perhaps a year." "A year?" Luciana's voice went sharp. "My father has detailed records of every transaction, every trade route, which will be very helpful during the investigation," Erskine interrupted gently. "But procedure must be followed. I am sorry." After he left, Rowan and Luciana sat in stunned silence. "This was planned," Luciana said finally. "Pemberton, Harrington, all of them. They knew exactly how to strike where it would hurt most." "But they're trying to force me to renounce you," Rowan said slowly, "to publicly distance myself from you and your father. If I do, the investigation likely disappears." "Then do it." He stared at her. "What?" Luciana stood, her face a mask of control. "Make a public statement. Say you were deceived about my background. Claim the marriage was contracted under false pretenses. Seek an annulment." "Are you insane?" "I'm practical," she shot back. "This is exactly what I warned you about. My presence in your life is destroying everything. Your reputation, your finances, your position. I don't care." "You should!" She was shouting now, all composure shattered. "This is 300 years of legacy, Rowan. Your family's name, your ancestral home. You can't throw it away for a woman you've known for 3 months." "Watch me." The words were quiet, but they carried absolute conviction. Luciana shook her head, tears sliding down her scarred cheek. "You'll hate me for it eventually. When the estates are gone, when you're ruined beyond recovery, when there's nothing left, you'll look at me and wish you'd chosen differently." Rowan crossed the room in 3 strides and gripped her shoulders. "Listen to me. My father spent his entire life worshipping legacy and tradition. It made him cruel and cold and ultimately destroyed him. I will not make the same mistake. I will not choose dead ancestors over a living future. Even if that future leads to ruin? Even then." He gentled his grip, thumbs stroking her shoulders. "We'll fight this, Luciana, together, and if we lose everything, we'll rebuild together. But I cannot, go back to the man I was before you. That man was already dead. You brought me back to life." She collapsed against him, and Rowan held her while she cried for the first time since he'd known her. All the strength, all the fierce pride. It cracked open, revealing the frightened woman underneath who'd been fighting alone for so long. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered against his chest. "How to let someone fight beside me instead of fighting alone." "Neither do I," Rowan admitted. "I suppose we'll figure it out together." They stood like that for a long time, 2 damaged people clinging to each other while the world they knew crumbled around them. The next morning, Rowan sent for Vincent Valles. Luciana's father arrived within hours, his usual leonine confidence dimmed by worry. He listened to Rowan's explanation of the bank's allegations with a darkening expression. "Smuggling," he said flatly. "They accuse me of smuggling." "Can you prove otherwise?" Rowan asked. "Of course I can prove it. I have 15 years of customs documents, trade licenses, port authorities' seals from a dozen countries." Vincent's accent thickened with anger. "But that's not the point. The point is that these English lords have decided I'm not worthy of their precious bloodlines, so they'll destroy anyone who disagrees." "Then we give them the proof," Luciana said. "Force them to admit they were wrong." Daughter. Vincent's voice softened. You don't understand how these men operate. Proof doesn't matter. Truth doesn't matter. They've decided you don't belong, and they'll twist any evidence to support that decision. So we do nothing? Luciana demanded. Let them win? No. Vincent stood, suddenly decisive. We do what merchants have always done when faced with hostile powers. We find leverage. What kind of leverage? Her father smiled grimly. Every lord who signed that complaint against you? I've done business with half of them. And in business, secrets are currency. Lord Pemberton's wine imports? He's been dodging customs duties for 3 years. Harrington's textiles? Manufactured using child labor in Manchester factories that would horrify his constituents. The Earl of Whitmore invested heavily in a mining venture that collapsed, defrauding hundreds of workers. He's kept that quiet, but I have the documents. Rowan felt cold certainty settle over him. You're talking about blackmail. I'm talking about mutually assured destruction, Vincent corrected. They want to play dirty? Fine. We show them exactly how dirty we can play. No. Luciana's voice was sharp. Absolutely not. Both men turned to stare at her. If we blackmail them, we become exactly what they claim we are, she said. Common criminals willing to do anything for power. And even if it works, they'll never stop hating us, never stop attacking. We'll spend the rest of our lives waiting for the next assault. Then what do you suggest? Vincent asked. Luciana looked at Rowan, and he saw something fierce and dangerous in her eyes. We stop playing their game entirely. What does that mean? It means we don't defend ourselves to the Bank of England. We don't beg for social acceptance. We don't prove we're worthy of their world. She straightened, and Rowan saw the woman who'd walked down the cathedral aisle, scarred and unafraid. We build our own. Over the next week, Luciana outlined a plan so audacious that Rowan's initial response was incredulous laughter. You want to turn Calder House into a trading hub? Not just trading. They stood in the estate's empty east wing, 12 rooms that hadn't been used in decades. A center for international commerce. We have the space, the location near London, and through my father's connections, access to merchants from across Europe and beyond. We host them, facilitate deals, take a percentage of transactions. That's trade, Rowan said. Dukes don't engage in trade. Poor dukes do, Luciana countered, and we're about to be very poor if that investigation continues. This way we create income that doesn't depend on aristocratic approval. We build relationships with people who value results over bloodlines. It would be seen as an unforgivable degradation of the title. By people who already hate us. She turned to face him fully. Rowan, you said you wouldn't choose dead ancestors over a living future. This is that choice. We can cling to tradition and slowly suffocate, or we can adapt and survive. He looked around the dusty, forgotten wing, imagined it filled with merchants and traders, contracts and negotiations. His father would have died of shame at the very thought. If we do this, he said slowly, there's no going back. The House of Lords will likely strip my voting privileges. Society will completely ostracize us. We'll be traitors to our class. I know. And you're willing to risk that? Luciana smiled, sad and fierce and beautiful. I've never belonged to their world anyway. The question is whether you're willing to leave yours. Rowan thought of the empty rituals he'd endured for years, the cold formality, the constant performance of caring about things that didn't matter. Then he thought of mornings in the orangery with Luciana, of honest conversation and shared purpose, of finally feeling like his life meant something beyond maintaining a legacy. Yes, he said. I'm willing. They began immediately. Vincent used his connections to spread word through the merchant networks. Calder House was open for business. Within days, the first traders arrived. A Portuguese textile merchant, a German banker, an Italian spice trader. Luciana hosted them with the same tactical brilliance she'd used at the Marlborough Ball, but here her merchant background was an asset rather than a liability. Rowan found himself negotiating contracts and percentages, using the sharp mind he'd honed on estate management to navigate commercial deals. It was exhilarating in a way aristocratic gatherings had never been. Here, competence mattered more than titles. The East Wing transformed. Empty rooms became offices and meeting chambers. The dusty ballroom hosted merchant dinners where deals were struck over wine and honest conversation. Money began flowing, modest amounts at first, but steady and growing, and London society watched in absolute horror. The Duke of Calder has become a tradesman, the newspapers proclaimed, ancient lineage debased by commercial pursuits. The House of Lords called an emergency session to discuss Rowan's conduct unbecoming, and then Vincent Valles was arrested. The news came at midnight. Grimsby woke Rowan and Luciana with the message. Crown authorities had seized Vincent at the London docks, charging him with smuggling French brandy in violation of trade sanctions. Luciana went white. "It's a lie. My father would never—" "It doesn't matter if it's true," Rowan said, already dressing. "They've been waiting for an excuse. This is it." They rode through darkness to the magistrate's building, but were barred entry. Vincent was being held pending trial, bail denied due to flight risk. "I want to see him," Luciana demanded of the guard. "No visitors, magistrate's orders." "I'm his daughter. Don't care if you're the queen herself. No visitors means no visitors." Rowan pulled Luciana away before she could do something that would get her arrested as well. "We need a barrister," he said. "Someone who can—" "No one will take the case," Luciana said dully. "Not against charges backed by half the House of Lords. My father is going to hang, and there's nothing we can do about it." "There's always something we can do." But for the first time since their marriage, Rowan wasn't sure he believed it. The trial was set for 1 week later. 1 week to find evidence, witnesses, some way to prove Vincent's innocence against charges that reeked of political manipulation. They tried everything. Rowan called in every favor he had left. Luciana went through her father's records, building a timeline that proved he couldn't have been smuggling the brandy. They hired 3 different barristers, all of whom quietly withdrew after receiving warnings about the case. By the 6th day, desperation had set in. "There has to be something," Luciana said for the 100th time, pacing Rowan's study. "Some proof, some witness." "There isn't." Rowan's voice was hollow. "They've made sure of that. This was never about evidence. It's about power. They're showing us what happens when you defy the natural order." Luciana stopped pacing. "Then we show them what happens when you corner a merchant's daughter." Something in her tone made Rowan look up. "Luciana, what are you thinking?" "My father keeps his most sensitive documents in a safe house in London. Contracts, correspondence, things that could destroy powerful men if made public." Her eyes were dark, dangerous. "He told me once that leverage is the only currency that truly matters. You said you wouldn't blackmail them. That was before they arrested my father on false charges." She turned to him, and Rowan saw the Naples docks in her expression, the place where she'd learned that survival sometimes required ruthlessness. "I won't let him hang to preserve my principles." "If you do this, there's no coming back from it," Rowan warned. "You'll be the villain they've always claimed you were." "I don't care," her voice broke. "He's my father, Rowan. He's the only family I have. I'll burn every bridge in England if it means saving him." Rowan understood that desperation intimately. Hadn't he married a stranger to save his estates? Sacrificed his pride for his legacy? "Then we do it together," he said. The safe house was in Southwark, disguised as a modest warehouse. Luciana picked the lock with practiced ease, another skill from her merchant days that would have scandalized London society. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls, meticulously organized. Luciana went straight to a specific drawer, pulling out a leather portfolio. 3 years ago, Lord Pemberton approached my father about investing in a venture," she said, flipping through documents. "A factory in Birmingham that manufactured rifle parts. Pemberton claimed it was for sporting guns, but the specifications—" She pulled out technical drawings. "These are military weapons. Pemberton was selling arms to foreign powers without Crown authorization. That's treason." Rowan felt ice in his veins. "If you expose this, Pemberton will be executed, and my father will go free." Luciana's hands were steady, her expression calm in a way that was somehow more frightening than panic. "One life for another. Seems fair." "Luciana." Rowan caught her wrist. "This is murder. You'd be knowingly sending a man to his death. A man who fabricated charges against my father, Who's been trying to destroy us since the day we married? She met his eyes. Would you hesitate if it was your father they'd arrested? The honest answer was no. Rowan would have burned London to ash to save someone he loved, but there was a difference between what he would do and what he should do. There has to be another way, he said. Name it. He couldn't, and they both knew it. They stood in that warehouse, surrounded by secrets that could topple kingdoms, and Rowan saw their future crystallize. If they used this information, they would win. Vincent would go free. Their enemies would be destroyed, but they would become exactly what London feared: merchants who traded in human lives, who valued victory over honor. If they didn't, Vincent would hang, and Luciana would never forgive him or herself for choosing principles over family. There might be one other option, Rowan said slowly. What? We don't expose Pemberton. We offer him a deal. Rowan's mind raced, putting together a strategy. We let him know we have the documents, that we could destroy him with a single letter to the crown. But we won't, if he withdraws the charges against your father and stops the campaign against us. Blackmail instead of exposure, Luciana said. Still criminal. Yes, but not murder. She looked at him for a long moment. You're trying to save my soul. I'm trying to save us both. He took the portfolio from her hands, studying Pemberton's signatures on damning contracts. If we do this, if we threaten him, we cross a line. But we can still come back from it. Execution is permanent. Luciana leaned against him, suddenly exhausted. I used to think I was strong enough to do anything, make any hard choice, but this, her voice cracked. I don't know if I can live with either option. Then let me carry it, Rowan said. I'll approach Pemberton. I'll make the threat. Whatever consequences come from it, they'll land on me. No. She straightened, steel returning to her spine. We do this together. Like you said, we're partners now. They sent the message that night. A brief note delivered to Lord Pemberton's townhouse, requesting a meeting at Calder House the following morning. Enclosed was a single page from Vincent's files, just enough to make clear what they possessed. Pemberton arrived at dawn, flanked by two large men who looked like former boxers. His face was mottled with rage and fear. You dare threaten me? He snarled, storming into the drawing room where Rowan and Luciana waited. We dare offer you a choice, Rowan said calmly. Withdraw the charges against Vincent Velez. End your campaign against our house. Do both publicly, with an apology for the misunderstanding. Or these documents find their way to the Crown Prosecutor, Luciana said, along with testimony from my father's associates who can verify their authenticity. The treason trial will be brief, the hanging even briefer. Pemberton's face went from red to white. You wouldn't. The scandal would destroy you as much as me. We're already destroyed, Rowan said. You and your allies made sure of that. We have nothing left to lose. For a long moment, Pemberton stared at them both, trying to find a bluff, a weakness, something to exploit. But Rowan and Luciana stood united, and in their eyes was the absolute certainty of people who had already lost everything that mattered to society's rules. This is extortion, Pemberton said finally. Yes, Luciana agreed. Do we have a deal? The silence stretched like a blade against throat. Then Pemberton exhaled slowly. The charges will be withdrawn by this afternoon. I'll make a public statement that new evidence exonerated Velez, and I'll suggest to my associates that perhaps we've been overzealous in our judgment of your household. We want it in writing, Rowan said. You'll have it. Pemberton turned to leave, then paused. You've made powerful enemies today. We made those enemies when we refused to bow, Luciana said. This just evening the odds. After Pemberton left, Rowan and Luciana stood in silence. They had won. Vincent would be freed. The attacks would likely cease, at least for now, but the victory tasted like ashes. We've become blackmailers, Luciana said quietly. We've become survivors, Rowan corrected, but his voice lacked conviction. That evening, Vincent was released. He arrived at Calder House looking older, worn by a week in prison, but alive. He embraced Luciana for a long moment, and Rowan saw tears on both their faces. How did you manage it? Vincent asked. We found leverage, Rowan said, just like you suggested. Vincent's eyes sharpened, reading everything they weren't saying. I see. And what did this leverage cost you? Nothing we can't live with, Luciana said quickly, too quickly. Her father studied them both, then nodded slowly. That's how it always starts, a small compromise, a necessary evil. Before you know it, you've become the very thing you fought against. We had no choice, Rowan said. There's always a choice, boy. But sometimes all the choices are terrible, and you pick the one you can sleep with. Vincent poured himself brandy with shaking hands. I've made those choices too, built my empire on them, so I won't judge. But I'll warn you, the first compromise is the hardest. After that, they get easier. And that's when you should start worrying. That night, Rowan couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of their shared chambers, watching moonlight silver the gardens Luciana had rebuilt with her own hands. She joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. Regrets? She asked. Hundreds, Rowan admitted, but none about choosing you. Even though I've dragged you into blackmail and scandal? Even though, he turned in her arms. We did what we had to do. We saved your father. We protected ourselves. Then why does it feel like we lost something? Because they had. Rowan knew it with cold certainty. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They'd learned that principles were flexible when survival was at stake. They'd discovered exactly how far they'd go to protect each other, and that knowledge changed everything. We'll find our way back, he said, hoping it was true. Luciana kissed him, desperate and seeking reassurance neither could quite provide. And as they held each other in the darkness, both wondered what they would become if the world pushed them any harder. The answer came sooner than either expected. 3 days later, a letter arrived bearing the royal seal. Rowan broke it open with numb fingers and read words that made his blood run cold. What is it? Luciana asked. The Queen, Rowan said slowly, has requested our presence at court. Immediately. The royal summons sat on Rowan's desk like a coiled snake, the wax seal bearing the unmistakable mark of Queen Victoria herself. This could be anything, Luciana said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Perhaps she wants to discuss trade routes. The Crown has interests in Mediterranean commerce. The Queen doesn't personally summon minor dukes to discuss trade, Rowan interrupted. He paced the study, mind racing through possibilities, each worse than the last. Someone told her about Pemberton, about the blackmail. We're going to be arrested. We don't know that. What else could it be? He spun to face her. We threatened a lord with treason charges. That's conspiracy against a peer of the realm. The penalty is... I know what the penalty is. Luciana's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. We face it together. Whatever comes. Vincent, who'd been listening from the doorway, cleared his throat. Or you run. I have ships leaving for Marseille tonight. You could be in France before anyone notices you're gone. And live as fugitives? Rowan shook his head. Abandoning everything we've built here? No. If we run, they win. If we face this, whatever it is, at least we face it with dignity. Dignity doesn't keep you out of prison, Vincent muttered, but he nodded, understanding. When does she want you? Tomorrow. Noon. Rowan looked at Luciana. We should prepare for the worst. That night they lay awake in their shared bed, neither speaking, both acutely aware this might be their last night of freedom. If they separate us, Luciana said finally, her voice small in the darkness, if they send me away or imprison you, I need you to know that these months were worth it. All of it. The scandal, the fighting, even the blackmail. Because I found something I didn't know existed. What's that? A partner. Someone who sees me, scar and all, and doesn't flinch. She turned to face him. Someone worth burning the world for. Rowan pulled her close, memorizing the feel of her against him, the scent of orange blossoms in her hair. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember this. I chose you. I would choose you again, and I will keep choosing you until my last breath. They made love with desperate intensity, as if they could somehow forge themselves into something unbreakable through sheer force of connection. And when it was over, they held each other and waited for dawn like condemned prisoners awaiting execution. The carriage ride to Windsor Castle passed in tense silence. Luciana wore deep emerald silk that brought out the bronze in her skin, her hair swept up to reveal the full extent of her scar. If this was to be a trial, she would face it exactly as she was, unashamed and unafraid. Rowan had chosen formal court dress, every inch the Duke of Calder his ancestors would recognize. If they were to fall, they would fall with pride intact. The castle loomed before them, ancient stone and towering spires that had witnessed centuries of royal judgment. Guards in crimson uniforms directed them through corridors lined with portraits of long-dead monarchs, each seeming to stare down in disapproval at the merchant's daughter and her disgraced duke. Finally, they were shown into a surprisingly intimate receiving room, not the grand throne room Rowan had expected, but a comfortable sitting area with windows overlooking manicured gardens. Queen Victoria sat in a chair that managed to be both ornate and practical, her famous severity softened slightly by genuine curiosity in her eyes. She was smaller than Rowan expected, but the power radiating from her was unmistakable. "Duke and Duchess Calder," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone who'd ruled an empire since before either of them were born. "You may sit." They sat, backs rigid, hands clasped together between them. "I suppose you're wondering why I summoned you," the Queen continued, "given the rather spectacular rumors surrounding your household." "Your Majesty," Rowan began, "if we have offended—" "Oh, you've offended everyone," Victoria interrupted. "Half the House of Lords wants you censured, the other half wants you ostracized, and several have suggested I revoke your title entirely." She paused, studying them. What they haven't explained satisfactorily is why. Rowan and Luciana exchanged glances. "I'm not sure I understand, Your Majesty," Rowan said carefully. "The accusations are varied and dramatic. That you, Duke Calder, have degraded your title by engaging in common trade. That you, Duchess, are unsuitable due to your merchant background. That together you've somehow corrupted the sacred order of English aristocracy." Victoria's expression remained neutral. "But when I asked for specific evidence of actual wrongdoing, criminal acts, treason, genuine harm to the realm, they became remarkably vague." Luciana found her voice. "Your Majesty, we have engaged in commerce. We've turned Calder House into a center for international trade. If that constitutes degradation of the title, it constitutes adaptation," Victoria said sharply. "Something the English aristocracy has desperately needed for decades." She stood, moving to the window. "Do you know what I see when I look at my lords and ladies? People so obsessed with preserving the past that they're letting the future slip away. The world is changing. Industry, trade, innovation, these are the forces shaping the next century. And the nobility?" She turned back to face them. "They're busy worrying about bloodlines and propriety while their estates crumble and their influence wanes." Rowan felt the ground shifting beneath him. This wasn't condemnation. It was something far more unexpected. "You, Duke Calder, were facing financial ruin," Victoria continued. "Rather than beg or steal, you made a practical alliance. You married for money. Hardly the first aristocrat to do so, though you had the honesty to marry a merchant's daughter instead of pretending she was from some minor noble house. Then, when society rejected you both, you didn't retreat. You built something new." "Your Majesty is remarkably well informed," Rowan said. "I have excellent spies." Victoria's lips twitched. "And I pay attention to those who might be useful. Tell me about your trading operation." For the next hour, they explained everything, the merchant network they'd built, the deals facilitated at Calder House, the revenue streams they'd created that didn't rely on tenant farming or aristocratic connections, Vincent Valez's role in providing initial contacts and expertise. Victoria listened with sharp intelligence, asking pointed questions about tariffs, trade routes, profit margins. She was particularly interested in their connections to Mediterranean and Ottoman markets. "The empire needs better access to those regions," she said. "The current system, relying on a handful of chartered companies, is inefficient and vulnerable to political manipulation. A network of private traders coordinated through a central hub like Calder House." She paused, thinking. "It could revolutionize how we do business." "You're proposing we work for the crown?" Luciana asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "I'm proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement. You continue your trading operation, but you also serve as crown agents, facilitating deals that benefit British interests, gathering intelligence from your merchant contacts, helping modernize our commercial infrastructure. Victoria sat again, all business now. In exchange, I provide official sanction for your activities. Anyone who attacks you for degrading the title would be attacking my judgment. The House of Lords would fall in line. Rowan's mind reeled. This wasn't just survival. This was transformation. From social pariahs to crown agents, from scandal to official policy. Why us? He asked. You could choose anyone for this. Because you've already proven you can survive hostile opposition, Victoria said bluntly, and because you're not beholden to the old system. The established trading companies are controlled by the same aristocratic families who resist change. You're outsiders. That makes you valuable. And if we refuse? Luciana asked. Victoria's expression hardened. Then you remain outsiders. The attacks continue. Eventually, your enemies will find something that sticks, some genuine mistake or manufactured scandal. You'll be destroyed, and England will lose an opportunity to modernize. She leaned forward. I'm offering you a chance to turn your greatest weakness into your greatest strength. I suggest you take it. The silence stretched. Finally, Rowan spoke. We would need certain assurances. Protection from legal persecution. The ability to operate without constant interference from hostile lords. Done. And the bank investigation into my father's business? Luciana added. It needs to end, publicly, with full exoneration. Consider it handled. Victoria stood, signaling the meeting was ending. I'll have my private secretary draw up the formal agreements. You'll report directly to me through discreet channels. And Duke Calder? She looked at Rowan with something approaching approval. Your father would have been horrified by everything you've done. That's how I know you're exactly what England needs. They were dismissed with a wave of her hand, left to find their own way back through the castle corridors in a state of shock. Only when they were safely in the carriage, rattling away from Windsor, did Luciana finally speak. Did that actually just happen? Rowan stared at the royal papers the secretary had provided. Official documents bearing the Queen's seal, legitimizing everything they'd built. I think we just became spies. Traitors, Luciana corrected, who occasionally report useful information to the Crown. There's a difference. Is there? But Rowan was smiling, genuinely smiling for the first time in weeks. We did it. We survived. More than survived. Luciana looked at the papers, wonder in her voice. We won. They arrived back at Calder House to find Vincent waiting anxiously in the entrance hall. Well, he demanded, do I need to have the ships ready? Cancel the ships, Rowan said, still grinning. We're staying. Over dinner, they explained everything. Vincent listened with growing astonishment, occasionally interjecting questions, until finally he sat back and laughed. My daughter, the Crown agent, he said, shaking his head. Your mother would have been so proud and so confused. What happens now? Luciana asked. Now we expand, Rowan said, ideas already forming. If we're going to serve as a Crown trading hub, we need more space. The entire East Wing converted to offices and meeting rooms. Better accommodations for visiting merchants. Perhaps even a small warehouse on the grounds for storing sample goods. We'll need staff who speak multiple languages, Luciana added. People who understand both commerce and diplomacy. Mrs. Bramwell can help recruit. She has connections throughout London's professional class. They spent the evening planning, energy crackling between them like electricity. This was more than survival. This was purpose. Late that night, after Vincent had retired and the household had settled into sleep, Rowan found Luciana in the orangery. She stood among the citrus trees, touching the leaves with gentle reverence. Thinking about Naples? He asked. Thinking about how far we've come from that cathedral, she said. You, refusing to look at your merchant bride. Me, terrified I'd spend my life trapped in a cold marriage with a colder man. Rowan moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. And now? Now I can't imagine being anywhere else, with anyone else. She leaned back against him. We're going to change things, aren't we? Actually change how England does business, how they think about trade and titles and what matters. Probably, Rowan agreed, if we don't get ourselves killed first. There's always that risk. She turned in his arms, her scarred face illuminated by lamplight. but I think we're rather good at surviving impossible odds. We are at that. They kissed, slow and deep, tasting victory and relief, and the heady freedom of people who'd faced their worst fears and emerged intact. The next weeks moved at a dizzying pace. The bank investigation into Vincent Velez was officially closed with a public statement praising his exemplary business practices and invaluable service to British commercial interests. Several newspapers that had printed the smuggling allegations were quietly pressured to print retractions. The House of Lords received a brief but pointed message from the Queen noting her personal interest in the innovative commercial ventures being conducted at Calder House, and suggesting that those who valued their royal appointments might wish to reconsider any hostile actions against the Duke and Duchess of Calder. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Invitations began arriving again, cautiously at first, then with increasing frequency. Lords who'd signed complaints suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere when Rowan's name was mentioned. Lady Pemberton sent a stilted note, expressing hope that past misunderstandings might be forgiven. "They're terrified," Luciana observed, reading through the day's correspondence. "They think we have the Queen's ear." "We do have the Queen's ear," Rowan pointed out. "Yes, but they don't know how much influence we actually have. Let them wonder. Fear is more useful than friendship." The transformation of Calder House accelerated. Carpenters and craftsmen swarmed the East Wing, converting dusty rooms into elegant offices. The old ballroom became a grand meeting hall where merchants from across Europe could negotiate deals under crystal chandeliers that had witnessed centuries of aristocratic dancing. Vincent recruited a staff of multilingual clerks, translators, and commercial agents. Mrs. Bramwell proved invaluable in managing the household's expansion, treating visiting Turkish traders and German bankers with the same impeccable service she'd once reserved for English nobility. The first major deal facilitated at Calder House involved Egyptian cotton, British textile manufacturers, and French fashion houses. Rowan brokered the negotiations, Luciana provided cultural translation, and Vincent handled the financial structuring. The commission they earned was modest but represented something far more valuable: proof of concept. They could actually do this. More deals followed: spices from the Ottoman Empire, textiles from India, precision instruments from German workshops. Each transaction was carefully documented and summarized in reports to the Queen's private secretary, who acknowledged them with brief notes of approval. 2 months after the Windsor meeting, the Duchess of Marlborough requested a private audience. She arrived in a flurry of silk and subtle intimidation, though her eyes held grudging respect as she surveyed the transformed East Wing. "Well," she said, "you've been busy." "Your Grace," Luciana greeted her with perfect courtesy. "We're honored by your visit." "I'm sure you are." The Duchess settled into a chair in what had become Rowan's primary office. "I'll be direct. My son's betrothal to the French heiress is proceeding, but there are complications, cultural differences, language barriers. The girl is overwhelmed by English society." "And you'd like us to help smooth the transition," Rowan guessed. "I'd like the Duchess of Calder to serve as a mentor," the Duchess of Marlborough corrected. "Someone who understands what it's like to be foreign in our world, someone who can help the girl navigate society without being destroyed by it." She paused. "Someone the Queen apparently values enough to protect." It was the closest she would come to admitting defeat. Luciana and Rowan exchanged glances. This was an olive branch wrapped in practical necessity, exactly the kind of transaction they understood. "I'd be happy to help," Luciana said. "On one condition." The Duchess's eyebrows rose. "You're negotiating with me." "Everything is negotiation, Your Grace. You taught me that at your own ball." Luciana's smile was sharp. "I'll mentor your future daughter-in-law. In exchange, you publicly acknowledge that Calder House's commercial ventures serve British interests and deserve support from those who value the Empire's prosperity. You want my endorsement. I want your honesty. You're one of the most influential women in England. If you say trade and nobility can coexist, people listen." The Duchess studied Luciana for a long moment. "You've learned quickly." "I had excellent teachers. Life-threatening situations are remarkably educational." A smile ghosted across the Duchess's face. "Very well. You have your endorsement. The girl arrives next month. I trust you'll be ready." "We're always ready," Rowan said. After the Duchess left, Rowan pulled Luciana into a fierce embrace. "That was brilliant," he said, turning her request into leverage for broader acceptance. "That was survival," Luciana corrected. "One ally at a time, one victory at a time. Eventually, they stop being able to dismiss us. And start seeing us as indispensable." "Exactly." The French heiress arrived 4 weeks later, a frightened girl of 19 named Amélie, who spoke almost no English and looked ready to bolt at the first opportunity. Luciana took one look at her and saw herself 6 months earlier, terrified, alone, facing a world that wanted her to fail. "Bienvenue," she said warmly in French. "Welcome to Calder House. You're safe here." Amélie's eyes filled with tears. "You speak French?" "I speak 7 languages. You'll find England is full of surprises. Some good, some terrible, all survivable if you know the rules." Luciana took her arm. "Come, let me show you how to turn their weapons against them." Over the following weeks, Luciana became teacher, mentor, and ally to the nervous French girl. She taught her English phrases designed to disarm hostile aristocrats, showed her how to turn perceived weaknesses into strengths, helped her understand that perfect English breeding was less important than genuine intelligence and courage. Amélie bloomed under the attention, transforming from terrified child to confident young woman. When she finally met the Marlborough son at a formal introduction dinner at Calder House, she greeted him in flawless English and made witty observations about English weather that had the entire table laughing. The Duchess of Marlborough caught Luciana's eye across the room and nodded, acknowledgement and respect. Word spread. Other families with foreign brides or commercial interests began quietly approaching Calder House. Could the Duchess help with a German manufacturing partnership? Might the Duke facilitate an introduction to Ottoman traders? Would they consider hosting a dinner for Italian silk merchants? Each request was carefully evaluated. Some they accepted, building alliances and expanding their network. Others they declined, maintaining standards and avoiding association with ventures that might compromise their position. They were building something unprecedented, a bridge between old aristocracy and new commerce, between English tradition and global innovation. And London grudgingly began to accept that the Duke and Duchess of Calder might actually know what they were doing. 6 months after the Queen's summons, Rowan and Luciana hosted their first official ball at Calder House. The guest list was eclectic by aristocratic standards. English lords mixed with German merchants, Turkish traders conversed with French diplomats, Indian tea exporters shared drinks with Scottish textile manufacturers. 3 languages echoed through the halls at any given moment. It was chaos by traditional standards. It was magnificent. Rowan stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching Luciana move through the crowd with fluid grace. She wore crimson silk that made her look like a flame, her scar visible and striking in the candlelight. Men and women alike turned to watch her pass, and Rowan saw not disgust but admiration in their eyes. She had conquered them through sheer force of competence. Vincent appeared at his elbow, glass of wine in hand. "Quite the transformation from that cold cathedral, eh?" "I barely recognize our lives," Rowan admitted. "For what it's worth, I think you've done well, both of you." Vincent's voice softened. "I gave my daughter away thinking I was securing her future. Didn't realize I was also giving her a partner who'd help her become more than I ever imagined." "She did most of it herself," Rowan said. "I just tried not to get in her way." "You did more than that. You saw her, really saw her, scar and strength and everything in between. That's rarer than you think." Vincent clapped him on the shoulder. "My blessing comes 6 months late, but you have it, for whatever that's worth." Rowan found he had to clear his throat before responding. "It's worth everything." Later, when the guests had departed and the house had settled into quiet, Rowan found Luciana in their chambers, brushing out her hair before the mirror. He came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That we did it," she said softly. "We actually survived and built something from the wreckage. Against every odd, every attack, every attempt to destroy us, we're still here, stronger than before." "Together," Rowan added. "Together," she agreed. He took the brush from her hand and began working through her hair with gentle strokes. an intimacy that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with trust. "Do you remember what you said that first night?" Luciana asked. "About transactions being safer than love because they can't betray you?" "I remember." "Were you wrong?" Rowan considered. "No. Transactions can't betray you, but they also can't save you, can't challenge you to be better, can't make you feel alive." He set down the brush and turned her to face him. "I was trying to survive. What I didn't understand was that surviving isn't the same as living. You taught me the difference." Luciana rose and kissed him, slow and deep and filled with promise. "We should sleep," she murmured against his lips. "Tomorrow we have meetings with 3 new trading partners and that diplomatic dinner for the Austrian ambassador." "Tomorrow," Rowan agreed. But neither moved, content to stand in their shared chambers, in the house they'd rebuilt together, and simply exist in the quiet certainty of having found something neither had expected. Not just survival, but a future worth fighting for. And they had fought for it, through scandal and blackmail, through social warfare and impossible odds. They had faced the worst their world could throw at them, and emerged not just intact, but transformed. The Duke who once refused to look at his bride now couldn't imagine looking anywhere else. And the merchant's daughter, who'd expected nothing but cold transaction, had discovered something far more valuable than gold or titles. She'd found her equal, her partner, her home. Tomorrow came with unexpected news. Rowan was reviewing shipping manifests when Grimsby appeared in the doorway, his usual composure fractured by barely contained excitement. "Your Grace, there's a delegation at the gate, from the House of Lords." Rowan's hand stilled on the papers. "How many?" "7 lords, Your Grace, including Lord Wickham and the Duke of Somerset." Grimsby paused. "They're requesting an audience. All of them together." Luciana appeared from the adjoining office, tension immediately visible in her shoulders. "Is this an attack?" "I don't think so," Grimsby said carefully. "They arrived without guards. Lord Wickham specifically asked that I convey their respect." Rowan and Luciana exchanged glances. 6 months ago, a delegation of lords would have meant accusations and threats. Now the variables had changed enough that anything was possible. "Show them to the meeting hall," Rowan said. "We'll receive them there." The 7 lords stood uncomfortably in the grand hall that had once hosted aristocratic balls and now served as Calder House's primary negotiating space. Maps of trade routes decorated the walls alongside family portraits, creating a visual statement about the marriage of tradition and innovation. Lord Wickham stepped forward first, the young lord who'd laughed at Luciana's defiance at the Marlborough Ball. He'd grown into his title in the months since, carrying himself with more confidence. "Duke Calder, Duchess Calder," he began formally. "We've come to discuss a matter of some urgency." "We're listening," Rowan said, deliberately not offering seats. "Let them state their business first." Wickham glanced at his companions, then continued. "As you know, Parliament is debating new trade regulations, tariffs on imports, restrictions on foreign merchants operating in England, policies designed to protect traditional interests." He paused. "These policies will destroy half the commercial ventures in London, including several of ours." The Duke of Somerset spoke up, his elderly voice carrying aristocratic authority. "We've spent the last months quietly investing in trade opportunities, manufacturing, shipping, partnerships with continental merchants. Following your example, though we were too proud to admit it at the time. And now those investments are threatened," Rowan finished. "Precisely," Wickham said. "The old guard, Pemberton's faction, what's left of it, is using nationalism and tradition as weapons against modernization. They're framing the debate as protecting England from foreign influence, when really they're protecting their own obsolete power structures." Luciana moved to stand beside Rowan, her arms crossed. "What do you want from us?" "An alliance," Somerset said bluntly. "You have the Queen's favor. You've built relationships with merchants across Europe. You understand how to navigate both aristocratic politics and commercial realities." He met their eyes steadily. "We need your expertise, and in exchange, we offer our votes in Parliament." It was a complete reversal of power. 6 months ago, these men would have joined the chorus demanding the Calders' destruction. Now they were asking for help. "Why should we trust you?" Luciana asked. Half of you signed complaints against us. Wickham had the grace to look ashamed. You're right, we were wrong. We let fear and tradition blind us to what was actually happening. You and the Duke showed us there's another way forward, one that honors our heritage while embracing the future. He straightened. We're asking for a chance to prove we've learned that lesson. Rowan studied the assembled lords. He saw genuine desperation in some faces, pragmatic calculation in others. But beneath it all was something more important, the recognition that the old ways were dying and survival required adaptation. We'll need details, he said finally. Your investment portfolios, the specific regulations you're concerned about, evidence that you're actually committed to reform and not just protecting profits. You'll have everything, Somerset promised. And understand this, Luciana added, her voice sharp as glass. If we do this, we do it our way. No half measures, no compromising with the reactionaries who want to drag England backward. You commit fully to modernization, or you find other allies. Agreed, Wickham said immediately. The others nodded. Then we have a deal, Rowan said. Preliminary, pending review of your documentation. We'll meet again in 3 days. After the lords departed, Luciana turned to Rowan with wonder in her eyes. They came to us, she said. Not demanding, not threatening, asking. The world is changing, Rowan replied. We just happen to change faster than everyone else. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Vincent helped analyze the Lords' financial portfolios, identifying which investments were legitimate, forward-thinking ventures and which were simply aristocrats trying to profit from change without actually believing in it. Luciana coordinated with their merchant contacts across Europe, gathering intelligence on the proposed regulations and their likely impacts. Rowan drafted a comprehensive strategy for parliamentary opposition, drawing on his understanding of aristocratic psychology and political maneuvering. When they reconvened with the Lords, the Calders presented a unified plan, a coalition of reform-minded peers who would publicly advocate for open trade policies while privately leveraging their commercial connections to make traditionalist restrictions economically unviable. You want us to fight our own class, Somerset observed. We want you to lead your class into the future, Luciana corrected. There's a difference. The debate lasted 4 hours. Arguments flared about tactics, timing, who should speak in Parliament, and what message they should convey. But underneath the disagreement was a shared recognition that doing nothing meant slow extinction. Finally, Wickham stood. I'll speak first. In the House of Lords, next week, I'll argue that England's strength has always come from adaptation, not isolation. That our empire was built by merchants and traders, not by hiding behind tariff walls. They'll call you a traitor to your class, another lord warned. Let them, Wickham said. The Duchess of Calder survived being called worse and came out stronger. I think I can manage some insults from men who peaked 30 years ago. Rowan felt something shift in the room, a crystallization of purpose. These weren't just reluctant allies anymore. They were believers. The parliamentary session became the talk of London. Lord Wickham's speech was passionate and provocative, arguing that true English strength came from embracing the world rather than fearing it. He cited specific examples of successful commercial ventures, many facilitated through Calder House, and challenged his fellow peers to visit the new trading hub and see the future being built. The traditionalists erupted in outrage, but the speech struck a chord with younger lords and those whose estates were quietly struggling. The vote on the proposed restrictions was closer than anyone expected and ultimately tabled for further study. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a crucial delay, and it put the Calders and their coalition at the center of England's most important political debate. The backlash was immediate and vicious. Lord Pemberton, who'd been quiet since the blackmail arrangement, published a scathing editorial claiming the Duke of Calder had corrupted young noblemen with merchant values and was destroying the very fabric of English society. Several conservative newspapers picked up the theme, painting Calder House as a foreign influence threatening traditional English identity. The attacks reached a crescendo when someone leaked, or fabricated, documents suggesting Vincent Valles had once traded with England's enemies during a colonial conflict. This is coordinated, Vincent said grimly, studying the accusations. They're trying to paint us as traitors, not just socially unacceptable, but actually dangerous to England. Can you prove the documents are false? Rowan asked. I can prove I was trading in completely different regions during the conflicts they mention, but proof doesn't matter if people want to believe the lie. Luciana paced the study, mind racing. We need to change the narrative, stop defending ourselves and go on offense. How? Rowan asked. She stopped, eyes lighting with sudden inspiration. We host an event, not a ball or formal dinner, something completely different. We open Calder House to the public. Let ordinary Londoners see what we're actually doing. Show them that trade and innovation benefit everyone, not just merchants and nobles. That's unprecedented, Vincent said. Aristocrats don't open their homes to commoners. Exactly, Luciana said, which is why it will work. We show that we're not hiding anything, that we're proud of what we've built and want to share it with all of England, not just the elite. Rowan saw the brilliance immediately. An open house, demonstrations of goods from around the world, merchants explaining their trades. Real people, real commerce, real benefits to English prosperity. The traditionalists will hate it, Vincent warned. They already hate us, Luciana countered. At least this way we control the story. They had 2 weeks to prepare. Mrs. Bramwell coordinated a staff of 30, transforming Calder House into something between a museum and a marketplace. The East Wing became a showcase of international trade, silks from China, spices from India, precision instruments from Germany, wines from France, olive oil from Greece. Merchants were invited to set up small demonstrations, showing how their goods were produced and explaining the intricate networks of trade that brought them to England. Turkish carpet weavers demonstrated their craft. Italian glass blowers created delicate art. French perfumers mixed scents. Luciana insisted on one edition, a gallery documenting the history of English trade, from medieval wool exports to modern industrial might. The message was clear. England had always been a trading nation. They were honoring tradition, not destroying it. The Queen sent a private note expressing her approval and her intention to attend personally. When the day arrived, crowds began gathering at dawn. Rowan stood at a window watching thousands of Londoners line up outside the gates. Working families, merchants, students, even some curious aristocrats trying to blend with the common folk. Nervous? Luciana asked, joining him. Terrified, he admitted. This could be a disaster. If anything goes wrong, then we handle it together. She took his hand. Like we've handled everything else. The gates opened at 10 o'clock. The crowd flooded in, and Calder House came alive with voices speaking a dozen languages. Children marveling at exotic goods, adults asking serious questions about trade and commerce. Turkish merchants demonstrated coffee preparation. Indian textile merchants showed how fabric was dyed. German engineers explained their manufacturing processes. It was chaos and beauty and exactly what Luciana had envisioned. Ordinary people seeing that trade wasn't some abstract threat, but the reason they could afford spices in their food, good fabric for their clothes, books printed on quality paper. The Queen arrived at noon with minimal fanfare, deliberately dressed simply to blend with the crowd. She moved through the displays with genuine interest, asking questions and nodding approvingly at the explanations. When she reached the English Trade History Gallery, she stopped before a portrait of Queen Elizabeth I, the monarch who'd chartered the East India Company and begun England's trading empire. Well done, Victoria said quietly to Rowan and Luciana. You've reminded them who we've always been. Not isolationists hiding behind our island, but explorers and traders connecting the world. We learned from the best, Your Majesty, Luciana said. Victoria's lips twitched. Flattery, but accurate. She raised her voice slightly, ensuring nearby people could hear. The Duke and Duchess of Calder have done England a great service by creating this center of commerce. They represent the best of what our nation can be, honoring tradition while embracing progress. I'm proud to call them allies. The words rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. If the Queen herself endorsed the Calders, what right did anyone else have to condemn them? The traditionalist narrative crumbled under the weight of public opinion and royal approval. That evening, as the last visitors departed and staff began cleaning up, Rowan found Luciana in the gardens she'd rebuilt months ago. The roses she'd replanted were blooming now, filling the air with fragrance. She sat on a stone bench, looking exhausted and triumphant. We did it, she said as he sat beside her. We actually changed their minds, not through force or blackmail, but by showing them something better.
Ah, you did it, Rowan corrected. This was your idea. It was our partnership. She leaned against him. I had the idea. You had the credibility to make it work. Vincent had the connections. Together we built something none of us could have achieved alone. They sat in comfortable silence, watching twilight paint the gardens in purple and gold. Do you ever miss it? Rowan asked. The adventure of merchant life? The traveling, the freedom? Luciana considered. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. Clear goals, measurable success. She turned to look at him. But I wouldn't trade what we have here. This is a different kind of adventure. Building instead of just surviving. Creating a legacy instead of just making profit. A legacy, Rowan echoed. I like the sound of that. Speaking of which, Luciana's voice turned shy, uncertain in a way she rarely allowed. There's something I need to tell you. I've been waiting for the right moment, and I think, Your Grace,
Grimsby burst into the garden, his composure completely shattered. Forgive the interruption, but there's been an incident. Lord Pemberton has collapsed at his club. The doctors say it's his heart. He's not expected to survive the night. Rowan and Luciana exchanged glances, complicated emotions warring across both faces. Pemberton had been their most vicious enemy, had tried to destroy them through accusations, investigations, and character assassination. Had they gotten their wish through the blackmail, his exposure would have meant execution. Now fate was delivering a different judgment. Send our condolences to his family, Rowan said quietly. Whatever our differences, he deserves that dignity. After Grimsby left, Luciana spoke softly. Do you think we're responsible? The stress of the blackmail, of watching his world change around him? No, Rowan said firmly. He made his choices. We made ours. What happened to him was a result of his own anger and inability to adapt, not our actions. Are you certain? Rowan thought about it honestly. Certain enough to sleep at night. We defended ourselves and our family. We chose life over destruction when we could have chosen revenge. That's all anyone can do. Luciana nodded slowly, then seemed to gather her courage again. What I was trying to say before, about legacy. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. We're building one. Quite literally. It took Rowan a moment to understand, then his breath caught. You're pregnant, Luciana confirmed, tears and joy mingling in her voice. About 3 months. I wanted to be certain before I told you. Wanted to make sure we'd survived the worst of the storm before adding another complication. Rowan felt something crack open in his chest, a reservoir of emotion he hadn't known existed. A child. Their child. The living embodiment of everything they'd built together. How long have you known? He asked, voice rough. Since before the Queen's summons. I've been terrified every day that something would go wrong, that the stress would, but the baby seems determined to survive, like their mother. Rowan pulled her close, careful now in a way he hadn't been before, protective instinct surging fierce and overwhelming. We're going to have a family. We already are a family, Luciana said. This just makes it official. They sat in the garden as stars emerged overhead, planning a future that suddenly felt limitless. 3 years later, Calder House had become the undisputed center of international trade in England. The East Wing had expanded into additional buildings on the grounds, warehouses, offices, even a small printing press that produced trade publications read across Europe. The parliamentary restrictions that had once threatened to strangle commerce had been defeated through a coalition of progressive peers, merchant advocacy, and carefully deployed royal influence. Vincent Valles had officially retired, though he still visited regularly to dandle his grandchildren on his knee and offer sage advice to young merchants seeking their fortunes. The House of Lords had grudgingly accepted that Duke Rowan Calder was not going to conform to traditional aristocratic behavior, and had instead carved out a unique position for him, neither fully traditional nor completely radical, but something new that England was slowly learning to embrace. And Luciana, the merchant's daughter who'd once been scorned for her scar and her background, had become the most sought-after mentor for foreign brides and ambitious women across England. She taught them what she'd learned, that strength came from refusing to apologize for who you were, that adaptation was survival, and that the right partner could transform a transaction into a love story. Now she stood in the garden she'd rebuilt, watching two small children chase each other through the roses. Thomas, aged 2, toddled after his older sister with determined concentration. Eleanor, named for the woman Rowan had once loved and lost, was 4 and already showed signs of her mother's fierce spirit and her father's analytical mind. "Careful near the thorns," Luciana called. "We know, Mama," Eleanor replied with exasperated patience. Rowan emerged from the house carrying a third child, 6-month-old Margaret, named for Luciana's mother. The baby gurgled contentedly against his shoulder. "The Austrian delegation has arrived," he said, "and the Duchess of Marlborough sent word that Amelie had her baby, a girl. They're naming her Luciana."
After 6 children, I'm honored they had any names left, Luciana joked. But she was touched. Amelie had become like a younger sister, and their families visited frequently. Rowan handed Margaret to her mother and watched their older children play. "Do you ever think about that day in the cathedral, when I was too proud and too frightened to even look at you?"
"Sometimes," Luciana admitted. "Usually when I'm feeling nostalgic for simpler times when we only had society, finance, and potential imprisonment to worry about, rather than teething and temper tantrums." He laughed, pulling her close with one arm while she held the baby. "I was such a fool." "You were hurt," she corrected gently. "There's a difference. But you healed. We both did. Because of you." "Because of us," she insisted. "I was just as damaged, Rowan, just as afraid of trusting someone. We saved each other." They stood like that, watching their children play in gardens that had once been dying, but now bloomed with impossible beauty, wild southern herbs intertwined with English roses, creating something neither Italian nor English, but uniquely their own. "Thomas, don't eat that," Eleanor shouted, pulling something from her brother's mouth. "I should intervene," Rowan said. "Probably," Luciana agreed, but neither moved, content to watch their daughter handle it with the same practical competence she brought to everything. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and the Austrian delegation had been settled in guest quarters, Rowan and Luciana stood on the terrace where they'd first kissed after the Marlborough ball. The house behind them glowed with light and life, merchants and aristocrats sharing dinner, staff moving efficiently through rooms that hummed with purpose, a future being built in real time. "We should host another public day," Luciana said. "It's been 6 months, and there are new innovations to showcase. Already planning the next campaign?" "Always," she smiled. "That's what partners do. We keep building, keep adapting, keep proving that change doesn't mean destruction." Rowan pulled her into his arms, swaying gently to music drifting from inside. "Dance with me." "There's no music playing out here." "Lie. I can hear it perfectly." They danced on the terrace, older now and scarred by battles both political and personal, but stronger for it. The Duke who'd once refused to look at his bride couldn't imagine looking anywhere else. The merchant's daughter, who'd expected nothing but cold transaction, had found a partnership that transcended every limitation society tried to impose. "I love you," Rowan said, words that still felt miraculous even after thousands of repetitions. "Not because of duty or contract or any reason except that you're you. Fierce and brilliant and impossible to ignore." "I love you," Luciana replied, "because you saw me when everyone else looked away, because you chose me over everything that was supposed to matter, because you made me believe that home wasn't a place, but a person." They kissed as stars wheeled overhead and their house blazed with possibility. Inside, their children slept safely. Merchants and nobles broke bread together, building connections that would reshape England's future. Vincent dozed in a comfortable chair, content in the knowledge that his daughter had found not just security, but joy. And in the gardens, roses bloomed in impossible combinations, a living testament to what happened when different worlds collided and chose to grow together rather than apart. The story that began with cold calculation and desperate necessity had transformed into something no one could have predicted, a love built not despite their differences, but because of them. A legacy measured not in gold or titles, but in changed minds and opened possibilities. The Duke and Duchess of Calder had proven that the greatest victories aren't won through power or pride, but through the courage to see the person standing beside you, scar and all, and choose them over everything the world says should matter more. They had rewritten the rules of English aristocracy through sheer stubborn determination to build something better than what they'd inherited. And in doing so, they'd given their children, and England itself, a future where worth was measured in character and contribution rather than bloodline and tradition. Calder House stood as a monument to that transformation. What had once been a dying estate maintained through desperate pride was now a thriving hub where the old world and new met as equals, where a duke and a merchant's daughter proved that adaptation was strength, that change was survival, and that the most radical act of all was choosing love in a world that demanded cold calculation. As dawn broke over the gardens 3 decades later, an elderly Rowan stood at the same window where he'd once watched Luciana rebuild dying roses. Now those gardens sprawled across acres, famous throughout Europe for their impossible beauty. Luciana joined him, her hair silver now, but her eyes still fierce. The scar on her cheek had faded to a pale line, but she'd never tried to hide it. It was part of her story, part of their story. "The children want to expand into the Americas," she said. "Eleanor has connections in New York, and Thomas thinks there's opportunity in South American trade." "Of course they do," Rowan said fondly. "They're our children. Ambition is in their blood. Will you let them go? Can I stop them?" He pulled her close. "Besides, we taught them to adapt, to build, to take chances on impossible ventures. They're just following our example. We did create rather spectacular chaos, didn't we?" "The best kind." Rowan kissed her silver hair. "The kind that changes the world." They stood together as the sun rose over the empire they'd built, not through conquest or inheritance, but through partnership and the stubborn refusal to accept that their love was somehow wrong or lesser because it didn't fit conventional patterns. Calder House had become legendary. Young couples pointed to it as proof that love could overcome impossible odds. Merchants used it as evidence that England's future lay in embracing the world rather than fearing it. Reformers cited it as a model for how tradition and progress could coexist, but to Rowan and Luciana, it was simply home. The place where a calculated marriage built on debt and desperation had transformed into a love story that would be told for generations. The place where a proud duke learned that the greatest strength was vulnerability. Where a scarred merchant's daughter proved that worth had nothing to do with birth and everything to do with courage. Where 2 damaged people found each other in the ruins of what they'd thought their lives should be, and built something far better than either had imagined possible. And as the sun fully crested the horizon, painting their garden in gold, Rowan and Luciana, the Duke and Duchess of Calder, partners in business and life, survivors of impossible odds, stood together and watched another day begin in the house they'd rebuilt into a legacy. Not of aristocratic tradition or merchant ambition, but of something simpler and infinitely more powerful. 2 people who chose each other again and again, until choosing became breathing and love became the foundation on which everything else was built. The world had tried to break them. They'd broken the world's expectations instead. And in doing so, they'd proven that the greatest revolutions begin not with grand gestures, but with a simple choice: to see another person truly, to value them completely, and to build a future together that honors both who you are and who you're becoming. The story of the scarred bride and her reluctant duke had become a legend. But legends rarely capture the quiet moments, the morning conversations over tea, the shared glances across crowded rooms, the comfort of familiar hands in the dark, that were the real measure of their victory. They had survived. They had thrived. They had loved. And that, more than any title or fortune or political achievement, was the true legacy of Calder House. Proof that when 2 people refuse to accept the limitations the world places on them, there's no ceiling to what they can achieve together.